Well, welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Wallace Henry, and I am one of the designers that is part of what we call the Visual Displays group at Samsung, and we're responsible for designing all of the experiences and on-screen UI that you see on your Samsung TVs. And we're very excited to share all the knowledge that we've amassed over the years with you with the hopes of helping you create some really killer and great experiences on the TV. I myself have been designing TVs, TV UIs, and I've been also researching viewers of TV for upwards of 15 years or so. But the knowledge that you're going to see in these slides are actually amassed from a number of sources. All of our team members in the Visual Displays group have worked in numerous areas around TV, so we were really excited to share all of this knowledge with you. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about why and why people watch TV. That's something to really get your mindset around when you're trying to design a great experience for television. So what people already know and expect will influence how easy it is for them to learn a new app. So how people watch TV will affect how easily it is for them to learn and use a new TV app, as well as how appropriate that app will be for television. Now, TVs are not just big tablets. That's something for us to get our minds around. So this different language describing TV usage highlights that TVs differ from these other devices and how and why they're primarily used. So these are important differences that have a bearing on the appropriateness of an app for TV. So a killer app on a computer or a tablet may not totally be appropriate for TV. And I'll tell you a little bit why. So why do people really watch TV? There's lots of reasons, but primarily it's about storytelling. So storytelling is one of the most ancient forms of entertainment. It predates written language. You can imagine a Stone Age people sitting around their campfire at night being entertained by stories about adventures from their tribe or camp. People today sit around the living room sofa at night and watch entertaining stories around their TV. Another ancient entertainment activity is games. Interestingly, games are also primarily a TV activity. So one thing to remember is that TV is largely a passive experience. So TV is viewed at a distance, and we call this a 10-foot experience. In the US, people generally watch TV in their living room while sitting on sofas. Now, there are some exceptions for that. In Mexico, most people watch TV in their bedrooms. So the next couple of slides really illustrate how much people watch TV, and I'm not sure all of us are always aware of that, but computers, tablets, and mobile devices are all used individually. In contrast, people watch TV together. It's communal, especially during prime time. This may be both an opportunity and a challenge for TV app designers. For example, an app may enhance the TV experience for one individual viewer, while at the same time it could be annoying and irrelevant for a group of users. So this chart here describes how much leisure activity is spent in the United States, and as you can see, well over the majority of that time is spent watching TV. This is also another interesting chart. Here in Silicon Valley, it might be easy for us to assume that no one watches live TV anymore. That's passé, that's old school. People are watching streaming video now. They've got to watch their Netflix. In reality, though, while internet TV is rapidly growing, it's still extremely small compared to live TV viewing. Now, what implications does this have on app design? This implies that most people don't have much experience watching streaming video. More of their experience is coming from the behaviors that exist from live TV viewing. So another thing to keep in mind is that people are creatures of habit. Much of TV watching, like driving a car, is automatic, meaning people don't have to think about what they're doing while they do it. They just go through a set of routine actions and they go through a set of routine TV watching activities. What makes it challenging, that makes it challenging to introduce new features or apps into the TV experience if people don't come into contact with these apps frequently, or it challenges the habits that they've already formed. Now, people are truly TV watching experts, so let's define expertise. So spending 10,000 hours doing something is a widely accepted definition of being an expert. The average 16-year-old in the United States watches about 10,000 hours of TV. So by the time your app reaches its viewers, those folks are already well-versed in using TV. So people are already TV experts when it comes to viewing, anyway. So discoverability. A discoverable feature is one that people will find naturally during normal use of the TV. Since people are TV experts, most people don't study up on how to change the volume of their TV or how to change channels. People are used to just doing it, and so they do it. Likewise, people are used to having buttons on a remote control or functions on a TV screen that they never use. That's just how things are. They just accepted it. They don't really feel the need to know what these things do. So if people don't easily encounter a feature during their natural usage, chances are they will never, ever discover it. So discoverability and making things obvious is very key. It's also important to remember that TV is a leisure activity. So since TV is for relaxation, interacting with it needs to be obvious, not something you have to work at. Working at TV is sort of like an oxymoron. The quotes shown here are typical of what people have said during our research and our lab studies when we've talked to them about how they use TV. So these are examples of that. So one of them is a lot of times we watch TV to get our minds off work. I don't want to have to work at watching TV. I just want to turn it on and relax. So that's the mindset that people are in when they're encountering TV and they're using it. So efficiency is also very important. In our research, we commonly see that people don't want to expand or extend any unnecessary effort while interacting with TV. So the term couch potato is really true. Anything that would seem normal effort when you're not watching TV is extremely hard and laborious when you are watching TV. So the quote here really sums that up. If I could press one button instead of three to accomplish the same thing, then that's what I'd want to do. So just to summarize how and why people watch TV, TV is about entertainment. It's about relaxation. People don't want to have to work at it. TV is an experience that's enjoyed at a distance. People watch TV a lot. They spend a lot of time watching TV, especially in the US. And TV is an habitual effort. People don't try to forge new trails when they're watching TV. They just stay to the same habits that they're used to doing. So let's talk a little bit about interacting with TV. So during this part of the session, we're going to be talking through a list of heuristics. So heuristics are basically processes or methods or little rules that you can keep in mind while you're designing that'll help you think through the problems that you're trying to solve. Before we get started with that, just a quick question for the group. So when people do interact with TV, what do they do most often? Any guesses? Good guess. What else? Turn it on. Very good guess. One more? Volume. Okay, good guess. And the answer is they avoid ads. They avoid ads. So no Samsung Smart Gear for anyone. We all got that one wrong. But people don't interact much with TV, but when they do, studies show that a primary interaction is to avoid ads. This is true for both live TV and DVR. On DVR systems, this has mainly become an automatic behavior. People don't really think much about it. They just do it. In one study, ad skipping was the most frequent way people interacted with TV, and this happened every 8 minutes while they were watching TV. So D-pad Directional pad is the most common way people interact with menus and items on the TV. Almost all TV systems have a remote control with a D-pad or directional pad. A D-pad consists of up, down, left, right arrows, and usually a center button which you select with. Even pointer-based systems also incorporate D-pad capability. Almost any device displayed on a TV's work with D-pad. Now, this isn't only done to support legacy devices. Some people, mostly older people, or people with shaky hands, have difficulty with the pointer. But they don't tend to have the same type of difficulty with D-pad. So D-pad is always a very safe bet. Now, let's talk a little bit about the differences between pointer and using a mouse and D-pad. So D-pad navigation has some fundamental different properties from the mouse or a touch screen. For instance, with a mouse or your finger, you have random access. You can move directly to any point on the screen. Now, with D-pad, you can't move the selection to any arbitrary point. Instead, the D-pad moves a focus or a highlight from one selectable element to the next. You go up, you go down, you go left, and you go right. Also with D-pad, the focus is persistent. So one of the elements is always in focus. Also, there's always a default focus. So whenever you go to the screen, there's always something that is in focus to let you know where you are. Now, D-pad navigation is not very fast compared to a mouse or a touch, especially for screens with a lot of selectable elements. But it does have some nice characteristics. For example, since it makes discrete steps using discrete buttons, it doesn't require much coordination or accuracy. So when you're designing, although there's some constraints with D-pad, you can also use the positives of D-pad to your advantage. So one question you might be asking is, why not gesture, why not voice? Those are great technological advances. Using voice and gesture to overcome some of the shortcomings of D-pad would be good, would be great in some capabilities, but you'll always need to support D-pad, since not all TVs will support voice or gesture. Only the highest end models tend to support those. And if you want your ad to have a broad your app to have a broad reach, you're going to need to support all of the all levels of the TV. So, colored buttons. Our recommendation is to avoid them as much as possible. People in the US do not use color buttons very much at all. Many people just don't see them. When they do, they don't understand them when they show up they show up as references on the screen. Sometimes it's tempted to use it in an app to provide extra functionality for a screen. But it's better to just use one navigation model that's efficient and discoverable. So one question that we get quite often is it better to design one way to do something, or should you provide multiple ways of doing something? And there really isn't an easy answer for this, but we have some guidelines that you should probably consider. The more ways there are to do things, the more complex the system becomes. People don't expect there to be multiple ways to do something, and if there is, there's a tendency to think that the different ways of doing something is actually they actually do different things instead of the same thing. So, but on the other hand, having multiple ways to do the same functions may make it easy to discover a way to do that function to people who just happen to see it that way. So it depends on the situation, it depends on your app, but try to think through those guidelines as you're trying to solve that problem. So double-click and press and hold or other unusual interaction techniques for TV could be used as shortcuts, but they should be visible and discoverable. There should be a visible and discoverable primary way to do every task. So for example, for this screen, there's the ability to press enter to sort the list that you see here. but that would be an invisible function if there wasn't a tooltip that would explain that to you. Now, this is a double-edged sword. If the tooltip is also very cryptic or it's not written very well and it's not easy for a user to understand, then it might as well be invisible. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're designing. It's also very important to keep common functions efficient. So TV function usage patterns follow the 80-20 rule. So like most just like any other feature devices, so 20% of the functions are used 80% of the time. The other 80% of the functions are used 20% of the time. The commonly used functions need to be obvious and it needs to be efficient. So for example, on this screen, the most important thing to do on this screen and why users would go here would be to watch the video. The other functions are nice, but they're not as important as that. So the Watch Now button has focus, it's highlighted. So all the user has, or all the viewer has to do when they come to this screen is press OK or select, and then they're doing the action that they most likely would want to do when they come here. So let's talk a little bit about typing. Try not to do it if at all possible. So if you're planning to create a TV app where people need to type a lot, you may want to reconsider. The hardest thing to do on a TV is text entry with an on-screen keyboard. So the quote there is pretty representative of when people have to type with a remote. So what users typically tell us is, typing is so hard on this thing and so cumbersome, it's painful. So unless people will be happy typing with one slow-moving finger, people need a physical keyboard. However, there's some tasks that do require typing, and it's not too difficult. So for example, searching for shows on TVs tend to be very efficient because viewers need to only type 1 or 2 characters, and then a list is populated that's very close to what they're looking for, and then it's a matter of navigation. But other than that, typing is extremely painful and laborious on a 10-foot UI. So one thing to consider is if you have registration that you need the user to do, or there's forms that they need to fill out, consider pushing that type of management onto the personal device. That might be a more efficient and enjoyable way to accomplish those types of tasks. So let's spend a little time talking about the implicit save model. So in an implicit save model, a viewer can change settings and immediately exit or go to another destination directly, such as the guide or the DVR. And it doesn't require an OK, it doesn't require a cancel. You don't have to pop up an "Are you sure?" confirmation step. It's efficient and it's optimistic. By optimistic, we mean it assumes that the person actually wants to change the setting that they just changed. Now, in contrast, the explicit save model requires a computer-like confirmation or cancellation after changing a setting. It's very inefficient because you've got to keep asking people, are they sure they wanted to really do this? And it's also pessimistic. You have to assume that the viewer has made a mistake. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this. So if there's a risk that the user could lose data, or if they're choosing to restore their computer or their TV to factory settings, then it may be a good idea to use the explicit model. But in general, the implicit model is the best way to go. So to summarize this section, interacting with TV. TV is all about D-pad navigation. And D-pad navigation is very different than mouse or pointer. And people are used to D-pad navigation, so we suggest that you consider using that. Color buttons can be confusing, and controls need to be visible and discoverable. Make sure that frequently used tasks are very efficient, and remember that text entry is problematic, so think about other ways to use large-scale text entry. And always use the implicit save model unless you're convinced there's a risk of memory loss. All right, let's get on to screen design for TV. So a smartphone screen at about 1 foot away projects about the same size image on the eye that a 42-inch TV does at 10 feet away. The effective screen size is about the same. If you consider it a challenge to design for a phone, consider it because it's small, it's actually harder to design for a TV because it's viewed at so far away and is so much less interactive. So one of the things to really consider is making sure that the text that the viewer needs to read is large enough for them to see, at least with corrective lenses. Secondary text can be a little bit smaller, but it's just most important to make sure that text can be read from at least 8 to 10 feet away. It's also important that contrast is very high. You want to make sure that the background is not too busy, and you want to make sure that the text contrasts against that background so that it's easy to read. This is one of my favorite pictures here. When people see a screen with some buttons and instructions, they will generally first try to guess at what that button should do, and then they'll just choose that button. They just try not to read. If they're a little confused the second time around, they may try to read that first line of text, but then they're still going to try to guess. In general, people really hate reading a lot of text on TV. So one of the suggestions that we have is not putting too much text on television. Now, there's a flip side to this heuristic. There are times when some text or labels can be more efficient than none. So this is a great example. Most of these icons, you can kind of guess what they are. I still have no idea what the last one there on the right is at all. So some labeling there, some minimal labeling could also help in understanding what that is. So we talked about labels and not using too much text. If you have to use text on TV, remember you're talking to people and not computers. So don't use acronyms or esoteric language that they might not know. For example, BGM is background music, and OTT is over the top. These are items that most general TV users aren't going to really understand or know. While you're designing for TV, it's important to take a step back and consider who you're designing for and what they're doing while they're watching TV. And just remember the state of mind that they're in and how little energy that they have to actually interact. So even very simple things when you're not watching TV become perceptually very difficult when you're watching TV because you're in a very relaxed, lean-back state. So as possible, make screens simple. One thing we recommend is that each screen should represent one clear task at a time. We also recommend that you reduce irrelevant choices. So don't have people decide options that they don't really care about. Anybody remember this episode of The Simpsons where Mr. Burns is trying to choose between ketchup and catsup? Ketchup, catsup. So this is also a really good example about trying to get users to answer questions that the system should answer for them. So this is an actual visit that we did where the setup system required that the user tell the system who manufactured the cable set-top box. And I don't know if you can see that down there, but the label on the box is actually for the cable company that the viewer subscribed to, which is Comcast, but it doesn't say anything about the manufacturer. So this is just a good example of some of the things that you don't want to leave up to the user, that we should try to figure that out for them as much as possible. Yet another example, asking the user what time it is. We should let the internet connection speak to the OS on the TV and tell the user what time it is, and be very intelligent that way without having to have the user do that part of the work. So just some things to really consider. Another idea is to make sure that we keep our navigation hierarchy very shallow. You want to reduce the amount of decisions that people have to make when they're watching TV. And keep in mind that not all destinations that we design are going to be equally likely to be visited. So make that navigation very efficient, and don't let it cost so much to navigate through the hierarchy of your UI. So this is a good example of highlight focus. You can tell exactly where you are as a viewer. You're on TV shows because everything else seems a little more dim compared to where the focus is. So that's just a very good example of making it very clear, very explicit where you are. And it indicates the position of where the viewer is with using the D-pad. So we like to call this situation the navigation pickle, and this is an example, is at the top here, is the best example here, where for me to get to the items at that top bar, I've got to traverse all of the items in that list, and I don't know if you can tell there, but below the fold, there's goodness knows how many more items that I would have to traverse to. So this is what we call the navigation pickle, and this is something to really try to avoid while you're designing. A better option is the one below, where you can just navigate items in a tab structure and then move to the right. But even that one is a bit lacking because there's a lot of items there. And so you'd want to try to reduce that if you could. So one of the conventions that Samsung follows is that we put items at the bottom of the screen, and there's not very many steps that you need to traverse to get to those items. There's never more than 2. So that's something to consider as well. So what we've learned in our research is that people tend to watch TV in dimly lit environments or dark environments. So you don't want to use full pure white as a large background container for your TV, because it would be just blindingly bright for them in that environment. What we recommend is that you use a neutral background, and that you use a contrasting text color if there's text that people need to read on top, and that you keep it soothing, and just, again, remembering the environment that you're in and the state that the viewer is in when you're designing for TV. Another very important thing to consider is that 10% of the male population is colorblind. So color alone shouldn't be the only indicator of where users are on the UI. It's safe to use a secondary indicator, so we call this redundancy, and this helps a great deal for folks who are colorblind. It's also important to remember that TV is a visual medium. And what people have told us in research is that they would rather look at a wall of movie posters than read a list of movie titles. So this is an example of that. People also like transitions. It makes the experience come alive. It's a lot more enjoyable. For your inspiration for transitions, we recommend that you look to movies and TV for ideas and to be inspired. Try not to look at the web, although the web is getting better at producing things like that, but try to look at TV since that is the medium that you're designing for. Let's talk a little bit about action safe. So the action safe area is the area on the TV that's going to be visible. Basically, there tends to be more pixels below the bezel than what is shown. But if you design within the action safe area, you can be assured that everything you designed is going to be visible. So this is an example of what happens when you don't design with the action safe area in mind. Some of your design will be cut off. Another thing to remember is that since we're designing for TV, you don't want to take people away from TV. So if you can, try to reduce TV within a pip, or maybe take up only a portion of the TV as an overlay. If the experience really does require more of a full screen view, at least let the audio play behind the UI so people feel that they're still within a TV world and they can get back to it easily if they needed to. So to summarize this section, screen design, first, make sure that you remember that you really don't have a lot of screen real estate. So design with that in mind. Make sure that your setup steps are very simple. One way to do that is to keep one question at a time per screen. No irrelevant questions. Keep the navigation very simple. Remember to keep a shallow hierarchy and a very clear focus. And remember that it's all about TV. So viewers want to be in touch with TV. So when you put something over the screen, remember that you let a little bit of TV come out so that people have this perception that they could get back to it as easily as they could. All right, so let's talk about performance. So system performance is also important for a good TV viewer experience. So let's talk a little bit about that. When the viewer clicks a button on the remote controller screen, it's advisable that you give them immediate visual or audio feedback. And that feedback should occur at no less than 200 milliseconds. If the action is going to take longer than a few seconds, then we recommend that you do some sort of progress indicator, so some sort of circle that shows that the system is thinking, that it's heard you. And if it's going to be longer than 10 seconds, then you should definitely show a progress bar. And the idea behind that is that you want the user to know that the system actually heard them and received their request. But above all, you want to make sure that it's immediate and accurate. So, oh, and I forgot to turn up the volume on this one. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this, but we'll try and see. Do we have volume on this laptop? No? Okay. So I'll just do it with my voice. Beep, boop, boop. No. What you would have heard here is that every time the cursor is moving, there's audio feedback. So along with the animations, the audio feedback also gives viewers this perception that something's happening and it's happening immediately. So the reason why we want to do that is that what we've seen when we observe people and when we've been in a lab, that people are extremely sensitive to how long it takes for something to happen when they press a button. So these are actual quotes that folks have told us. They said things like, the TV needs to learn to go as fast as I can press a button because I get going so fast and I have to wait for the TV to catch up. So that's just something to really keep in mind. People are extremely sensitive to this. So software updates, this is very tricky. So the irony of this whole situation is that if a user doesn't use your app very long, very often, when they do go to your app, they're most likely going to need to download an update. But downloading that update might cause them not to come back because every time they go there, they have to download an update. So that is a bit of a problem. But some guidelines to keep in mind, if you can, do the updating at a time when people are less likely to be watching TV. Also, if you can, do the updating in the background so that it doesn't have to disturb the users. But that is a difficult problem to come across. The last topic we have to talk about is among the most important. So testing is one of the most important ways to ensure that you have a good TV experience. So when you're designing for TV, the most dangerous things that you can do is assume that what you see on your computer monitor is going to be representative of the experience that you've just designed. We recommend that you always take your screens and put them on an actual TV to see just how it's really going to feel in that environment. Our designers typically have at least a 42-inch TV on their desk, and every so often we're putting screens on the TV just to see how it feels. We recommend that you also use varying sizes. We also recommend that you test out the look and feel of your UI in various settings, because people are less likely to change the settings very often, and you just don't know what you're going to get. So to play it safe, to try to do it on a variety of different settings. It's also very important and very useful to test your interface with people if you can. This is a great opportunity to make significant improvements to the product. What you should do is first list out the most common types of people who will most likely use your app, and then take advantage of what they already know how to do when you're designing your app. Try to avoid the temptation of thinking that the typical user is just like you, because most likely they're not. So try to understand who you're designing this app for and try to talk to them as much as possible. The next thing you're going to want to do is list out the most frequent tasks that people are likely to do on your app, and then design your app to make those tasks discoverable and efficient. That way that will keep you in the mindset of designing for the viewer that you're intending to. Okay, so to wrap up, understanding how and why people watch TV is important to designing a great experience for people in this medium. Make sure that you adapt the TV to the viewer, because viewers won't adapt to your app. Design the app following TV heuristics for interaction, for screen design, performance, and testing. And this is going to help your app be familiar, intuitive, easy, and exceed expectations for your users. So to conclude, one of the things I wanted to do was present you all a case study of an app that Samsung recently purchased. This is an app that the team and I worked on. And it's a good example of all of the ideas and thinking that we just talked about. So we're going to switch inputs here. All right. And I'm just going to reload really quick. So the first thing that you notice here, is there any football fans in the house today? All right, cool. All right. Any Raiders fans? Right there? Yeah, I'm sorry for you, man. I had to bring that up. Anyway, this is an app that's designed for sports fans. And the idea was to present an experience that seamlessly integrated with the live viewing experience. So the goal was to give the viewer something useful, but that didn't take over the entire experience. And this was quite a challenge. So we talked a lot about contrast, making sure that things are visible and easily to read on the TV screen. And so we were able to do that because the moving background of the live picture actually provides enough contrast, and we try to stay within white or light colored text, and that helps it stick up above the screen. And I don't know if you noticed this, but when the animation, or when the app opens, I'll reload it just to show you, there's an animation that happens that kind of lets the user know that something happened, it's alive, and it's very quick and subtle, but it also lets you know that there's other options that are available. Now, the user can easily scroll through the entire experience by just using the up and down button on the remote control. So we did this because we wanted to mimic the channel changing behavior that's natural to users. So naturally, users are changing channels up and down. They know how to do that. They orientate their thumb on the remote control, and then they never have to think about the input device. Their entire focus is on the TV. So they can just mindlessly go through. We also made sure that all of the items that you're seeing here, there's nothing selectable except for going through the different screens. And so that allows users to get a widgetized bit of information without having to think about where do I go next. So the main navigation is up and down. There is no select needed. But we also had to consider that, what if there's a good play that's going on, and people want to see that, and they really don't want all this junk up on the screen. How could they easily get rid of it? And so we came up with an idea. By navigating to the right, just pressing the right button, it will minimize most of the UI off screen. Now, when we usability tested this, before we usability tested this, we had this idea that, hey, wouldn't it be great that when the app is minimized, that you could get these live Twitter updates that would just show up on the screen. And what we learned in testing was that when people minimize the app, their expectation was that it would be minimized, that they wouldn't see anything anymore. And so this is something that we learned because we put this in front of users, that, okay, we should probably take that away. We haven't updated the prototype yet to show that, but that was one of the things that we learned from our users. So it might be hard to see here, but there's an affordance there called show with a left caret. And by pressing left on my navigation pad, I can bring the app back. So it's very easy to bring it back and forth. People learn that very quickly, and then they really don't have to read the screen for that anymore. Now, one of the things that was important with this is, again, with the animations, is that as you're going through, immediately when I press, something's happening and there's some animation, and we were able to take advantage of the animation in such a way that we wanted this to be a non-deterministic. So this is something that you browse. You don't pull this up necessarily to look for specific stats. You pull it up because, hey, this might be nice, this is kind of interesting, and every time I navigate through it, there's something more interesting. So we didn't put a long list of items, there's only 3 available, but when you transition through, you can see the navigation, it feels like you're traveling back, and that these are sort of cards that are laying on top of each other. And it just gave users a feel of that this is kind of fun, this is kind of interesting, and it doesn't really cost me that much to navigate through it. Each item is as interesting as the next, so I'm not really lost. If we wanted to see a different game, since this is a live game, it's just a matter of navigating to the left, and then we have a menu. And because there's a number of games that are on each Sunday, we wanted to minimize the amount of information that people saw, so we only really showed people the games that happen to be on at that moment. Again, remembering that this is a TV experience, and so what's really important is what's on TV. And so that's all they need to really worry about. But for some of those users who may be interested in, say, the Raiders game that's going to come on next, there's a different area for them to go into. So they can go into this area. And again, instead of presenting a long list that would take up more space and obscure more of the TV screen, we collapse the items in a widgetized card sort of form, and the user can just navigate through, find the Raiders game, see that they're going to play later tonight, or later on Monday at 12:30. Let's just see what they're up against. And we provided a countdown timer, again, in the TV space. That's something that's very important. When is the game on? And this is kind of interesting. It just tells me that they're going to play in a day, and this would count down. I can see the weather. I can see what the Twitter sphere is talking about the game. I can see the matchups and how they're likely to do. And I've done all of this with just the 5-way navigation. And actually, in this implementation, I haven't even taken advantage of the select button. I've just directed people the area of where they need to point, and then the right thing just happens to go. So this is just an example of using the heuristics that we showed you, that you can come up with something that's kind of interesting and useful and appropriate for the TV medium. So that concludes the talk this afternoon. I really appreciate you coming out. I hope you really got something from it. And I'm available for any questions if you have any. Sure. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm here till Thursday. Tip your waitresses. No. Here.
Yeah, I know you started your presentation talking about the remote
Yes.
So my question to you is, where do you see this remote heading into the future? It seems to be getting more and more complex and pretty much breaking every design rule you talked about here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And we have the same discussions at Samsung as well. We do see that tablets have an advantage, as we talked about before, in terms of setting up your system. There's always this first run experience. And to make that experience great, the more we know from you, the greater we can make that experience for you. But there's always this hurdle to get this information from you. One way to do that is to take advantage of your personal device. For one thing, it's being a tablet form. Even though typing on a tablet isn't the greatest thing in the world, it's far better than typing on a 10-foot UI. But I think more of the magic might be to somehow seamlessly have the TV know as much about you as your tablet or your phone knows about you, because your phone knows a lot about you already. So seamlessly, if it could know that, then you've kind of really solved it already without having to type anything at all. So I think we're trying to look at how you can pair that experience more seamlessly by maybe pulling the intelligence of all the devices that you have around your home and taking advantage of that for your TV experience. I think there was someone right there first. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
How do you know where to design your cards so that you don't have you're not covering like a logo, or I saw the Fox logo there, and
yeah.
I'm sure Fox does not want that.
Yeah.
And because you never know if it's going to be the top or the bottom, or where
yes.
the scorecards are going to be, et cetera. So, because those are going to be all different for networks and things like that. So how do you deal with that? Yeah,
that's a great question. And that was the first question that we asked ourselves too when we decided to do this. What we did, and it was painstaking, we watched a lot of sports. I was not a sports fan when I started this project. I'm a huge sports fan now. We had to watch a lot of sports, and we had to watch a lot of different networks because every network presents the score bugs differently. And we looked for patterns. So one thing that was really interesting that I didn't point out that I should have, with the sport of football, not only do we have to be aware of the score bugs and the logo, and we decided we wanted to make sure that we stayed within that, and we also put a discipline on ourselves that we wouldn't show things that were unnecessary or only things that were really important because we're really trying to conserve space. We also noticed that, particularly with the game of football, that the camera person filming the game is your best friend, because during those plays, they're trying to get a wider shot as possible, and they're trying to keep focus on the ball. And it just so happens that the app, being the farthest right-hand of the screen, never gets in the way of the action of the play, because the ball is always in the center of the screen. So we looked at a lot of TV, we looked at a lot of how sports programming were putting their bugs. We tried to get in the mindset of what they were trying to do, and it just so happened, for whatever reason, for now, because it could always change, sports broadcasters don't want to put information on that right area of the screen, and so we just snatched it up. And I forgot who was next. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, Mike Bergen from Silicon Image. You mentioned that, of course, your phone knows a lot about you, and it would be great if your TV apps knew as much about you. Of course, Samsung builds MHL technology into all of their phones. If you don't know what MHL is, it lets you connect your phone to your TV, sends full HD or 4K to the TV while the TV charges the phone with no lag. So this is built into all the Samsung phones. Samsung makes the MHL adapters. Can you talk a bit about developing a phone app designed to run on TV?
And when you mean phone app, to run the TV, so to navigate the TV? And
no, to run on the TV. So when you connect your Samsung Galaxy S5 to your Samsung TV with an MHL cable or a Samsung MHL adapter, you can run an app on your phone that's then mirrored onto the TV.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So it can run live video streaming over the internet. It can run, it wouldn't have the NTSC or the ATSC signal coming over the cable or the air, but of course it's a connected device, being a Samsung smartphone. So talk a bit about developing a smartphone app that's designed to be viewed and interacted with on a TV. one of the things that MHL does, for example, is it uses the remote control, so it can use the D-pad. That's built into
Interesting, yeah.
all MHL phones, especially the Samsungs.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm not too familiar with that technology. So I can't speak too intelligently about that, but the way it's described, I think that the design principles that we talked about could still work, especially if you're still using a D-pad. Now, one thing that we have learned is in other experiences where we've experienced with using a tablet to control your TV just in general, one of the phenomenons that you run into is people tend to want to look down at the tablet to figure out where to go, make their decision on where they want to go, and then they need to look up at the screen to see, okay, did the system get what I was trying to tell them to do? And so for tasks that are what we call TV discovery, so I'm not sure what I want to watch, or I have a list of DVR recordings that I want to find, those tasks seem to work great with a tablet because I've already disengaged with what I'm currently watching and I'm looking for something else. So it's okay if my attention is consumed with the tablet. Where we're finding a challenge is the experience where we want you to engage with some information that we're presenting on the screen as well as the live TV broadcast at the same time. So the application on the TV that we're providing interacts somehow or enhances the view that you have. And I'm getting the X signal. That's where it becomes a bit of a challenge because now it's nice to have the D-pad because you have the tactile feedback. You've trained your thumb where to go to do the interaction, and you've kind of put your hand to sleep and you can just concentrate on what's going on the screen. So we're still trying to figure that out. Maybe some of you will come up with an answer for that or a good way to do that. But it's a fair challenge and it's a great question.